Hey everybody, it's Charles from HumbleMechanic.com. Today I'm taking your questions on PCV valves, gas in a diesel, worn out engines, and more. This is episode 197 of the Humble Mechanic Podcast. In order to get a question on a show like this, be sure to email me, charles@humblemechanic.com, just like it says right down here at the bottom. Ask your question right at the top, then give me some space and give me the details of your question. That helps me answer the question much faster, because then I can usually figure out really quick what your question actually is. Also, if you don't see your question on a show like this, be sure to check out the quick videos playlist on YouTube where I do one question per video. All right, let's talk about the sponsor of the day, which is CRP Automotive. CRP deals in a ton of OE maintenance and repair parts, timing belt kits, suspension components, and even fluids. In fact, they make the factory DSG fluid for Volkswagen and Audi. So check them out at crpautomotive.com. Hey, if you like the work that we do here and want to support the show, you can do that in a couple of ways. Check out the Crew Membership program where you get exclusive discounts as well as exclusive content from me and access to the training manuals that we build for our VW Audi training classes. You can also hit me up on Patreon as well, or use my Amazon link. All of those links are down in the description. All right, with that wrapped up, time to hit the questions. First one comes from Mike. I have a Mark V GTI with a bad PCV valve. No surprise there. Followed proper diagnostics to conclude that it was definitely the PCV. My question is, do you recommend going with a catch can with an Africa plate or just replace it with the OEM assembly and rear PCV hose? Also, if you do recommend a catch can, which one do you recommend? Looking for a can with a dipstick. Let me know your thoughts. Sorry for bothering you on Father's Day. Happy Father's Day if you are a father. Well, happy Father's Day. A day late if you're watching this the day the video comes out, to everybody out there that is a good dad. Hope you guys all had a really rad day. I know that so far mine's been awesome and seems to be going very, very well even after the show. All right, so let's get into Mike's question about Mark V catch cans. What the heck is an Africa plate? And whether he should put the PCV valve from the factory back on it or not. So let's talk about the factory one first. This one has been updated so many times. There were campaigns, there was warranty extensions, a bunch of nonsense. It basically boiled down to the valve kind of sucked, the design kind of sucked, and it was pretty problematic. So the fact that you had one that failed is no surprise to me whatsoever. So you can put that factory replacement back on. Again, it's been updated a million times, so it's better now than it has ever been. Not nearly as failure prone, but you know, it kind of depends on your overall setup. If your car's stock, no modifications, don't plan for modifications, this newest revision will probably be okay. Price point wise, it's probably considerably cheaper, and it's going to be ultra easy to install. You may want to throw whatever you spend on that PCV valve to the side to buy another one. Now, when it comes to installing a catch can with an Africa plate, what the Africa plate does is it basically eliminates the OEM PCV valve altogether, the PCV and oil separator valve. It eliminates it. It's a block-off plate with two fittings on it. Those fittings then go to a catch can, which acts similar to the PCV valve. More, though, it acts like an oil separator that's serviceable. So you can take the can out, you can dump it out. It looks all nasty. I think most guys do it on every oil change. You can do that, and then you're manually servicing it. The reason cars don't have that from the factory, I think for the most part, is it adds a whole nother element of maintenance to the car, adds a whole nother element to the cost of the car. Most people aren't going to do that anyway. Which one do you get? Do you buy the catch can with the Africa plate, which price point seems to be anywhere from $350 to about $500. That's a lot of money to put into one of those. But if that's the setup you want to run, and if you're modified, it's actually a pretty good setup if you're modified, then I would go with that route. As far as brands, you know, so many companies make them. Integrated Engineering, top-level company makes them. 034 Motorsports makes them. I know Black Forest has a setup. There's tons of them out there. Get the one that fits your needs the best. You said you wanted one with a dipstick, so I would find the one that had the dipstick and buy that one. I would also, if I were doing this, once I found the one that I liked, I'd want to find the one that was easily removed for servicing. You know, if I have to basically take the whole thing out in order to service it and dump it out and then put it back in, think about the time that changes on your oil changes. If you're doing them yourself, it's not a big deal. If you're paying someone to do that, boy, I would probably try and do my own oil changes if you're adding that onto it. So if I were going to do this, and let's say it was just our daily driven stock Mark V, I would put the OEM PCV valve on it, and I probably wouldn't run a catch can. If there were basically any modifications to that car though, I would probably do the catch can in some version or another. I don't know if I would do one that completely eliminated the PCV or not. I would probably be picking up my phone and making some phone calls to talk to the companies that make them and see exactly the setup of their PCV. You know, you can do a ton of research online. You're gonna find some people love their PCV and catch can setup. Other people have the Africa plate and like that better. It really all depends on your car, your setup, your tolerance for problems, your tolerance for maintenance. Remember, anytime we change things from the factory, there's potential for upside and downside. In this case, there's probably more potential for upside than downside, but we always have to keep in mind that there is the potential for downside. So shop Integrated Engineering, shop 034, look at Black Forest. If you're a crew member, you get a discount at Black Forest, so maybe I would start there and hit those guys up and see what kind of stuff they have. I know they do a lot in the catch can space. So Mike, man, I hope that helps, and hey, let us know which one you decide. And guys, anytime you do this kind of stuff, always feel free to head over to the Facebook page and post a picture of it, because I would love to see it. Or tag me on Instagram, and I'd like to see it too. All right, next one comes from Jesse. It says, hey Charles, you have a great show. My question is in the context of the engine transmission coupled together. Does driving a car or truck with a weak engine for a year or so negatively affect the transmission? If I replace it with a new rebuilt engine, is there a chance of transmission failing because of shock? Jesse, this is such a cool question, and there is not a yes-no answer to this question. To be very honest, there's not a yes-no question because there's so many variables that play into this. What is a worn-out engine? Is it an engine that doesn't have the get up and go that it used to? Or is it an engine that you're limping along for an entire year? That's really like my question for you. But let's talk through this problem and see what we can come up with. So let's say the weak engine is not an engine that is misfiring on every cylinder and barely runs. Let's just say it's old, it feels worn out, it doesn't have the horsepower that it used to. Odds are you will be 100% fine, as long as we make sure that everything is still cooling properly. You didn't mention if it was automatic or manual. I would say in manual transmission, probably nothing to worry about ever on the weak engine. And on the automatic side, there's probably very little to nothing to worry about either. I would just want to make sure that my coolant is flowing through if this transmission is cooled with coolant. Otherwise, that could really be a problem. My gut says when you ask this question that the answer is everything's going to be fine. Cars sit for 6 months at a time, start them up. They may be a little wonky at first. The battery might be dead, but usually once you get the fluid going and drive the car a little bit, it's totally fine. What I probably would do, and you're probably going to do this anyway, is if I'm taking a worn out engine and installing a new engine, a crate engine, a rebuilt engine, whatever, a refreshed engine, I would probably do some maintenance on the transmission as well. Do the fluid, do the filter, anything that's serviceable in that transmission. I would probably go ahead and do that because I think that full refresh will really help that car out. And you got now a timestamp of I did the transmission service at this time, 0 miles on the engine, right? And it's nice to always have that for documentation purposes. But what could potentially cause a transmission problem driving around a worn out engine or a bad engine for a year? I don't know. Overheating, of course, we can overheat the transmission. Perhaps some weird feedback. Let's say you had a crankshaft out of balance. Maybe that vibration or that walking of the crankshaft could cause damage to the torque converter seal. Perhaps that may be a really big stretch. My gut says you're going to be fine though, but this is one of those, if any of you guys watching this have had this happen or heard of this happening, down in the comments, leave your story because I'd love to read it. I'm picturing that, yes, it is possible. It's just not super likely. I try to stay away from the "this will never happen," air quotes, right? "This will never happen" kind of thing, because sure enough, if I say that, there are people that have had something weird happen. Anything can happen in the automotive world, so I'm not going to say no, but I think your odds are so low that I wouldn't worry too much about it. One other thing, maybe look at the engine and why it's worn out or what's wrong with it. Maybe there's some easy things you can fix on it to feel more comfortable about riding around with it with the plans to replace it a year from now. All right, next one comes from Corrine. Sorry if I botched your name up there, by the way. Hey Charles, I'm a new subscriber, driven VW Audi Porsche all my life. Spent a few years in the VW Audi sales, but I'm also strong technically. Enjoy your broadcast immensely. Thanks, man. I've run into a problem with my 03 Touareg 4.2 that I can't seem to solve. I would like your take on it. I have a very good aftermarket tech, and he's trained in VW. This is an intermittent problem. Yeah, I do kind of hate those sometimes. The vehicle will work perfectly for a short period of time. Suddenly, it will experience a drivability problem. At a low RPM, pulling away of a stoplight, it will almost die. It feels like a fuel issue. Once it gets to about 3,000 RPM, power comes on. If you cycle the ignition, the problem goes away for a few minutes. When it's doing this, we scan the car. Only codes that it shows are faults for the intake runner, which are not opening and closing properly. We first thought it was fuel delivery. Both pumps tested okay. Here's the spooky thing. If we clear the DTC, the problem goes away for a few weeks. It eventually comes back. Clearing the code fixes the problem again for a few weeks. My understanding of the DTC code is that it's just a marker of what the ECU saw. They should not affect vehicle operation. Any thoughts here? Have you seen this problem? So I haven't ran into this issue directly, but I have run into some weird problems with Touaregs before, aka pretty much every 04 Touareg ever built. So it's dying, it feels like it's fuel. Let's make sure we're testing both fuel pumps. One pump is like start and wide open throttle. The other one is kind of all the time. So make sure you're properly testing both fuel pumps. It has a saddle tank because it's 4Motion, or 4X motion, I guess, technically on the Touareg. So it has two fuel pumps and a bunch of lines in the fuel tank. In fact, if you pull those pumps up, it's a nightmare under there. I remember one time very vividly, it was one of the worst fuel pump replacement experiences I had. It was winter, the car sat outside, towed it in the shop, and here's me with both hands in the fuel tank, right? It's a little further than this, like this, trying to get these lines connected in probably 20-degree fuel. It was absolutely miserable. Back to the thing. So you are getting faults. You're getting faults for intake runners. Dude, look at that first. Those arms are really good about braking, and the reason they usually break is the manifold gets seized. So you can try and move them by hand. There's the armatures that are attached to two vacuum diaphragms, then go into rods into the intake manifold. If you can't move the rods in the intake manifold, you really might want to consider getting that fixed or replaced first. I'm sure by now someone has come out with like a flap elimination kit. I know they have little machined arms that you can put on, but if your manifold's failing anyway, those arms aren't going to do you any good. So I don't want to just tell you, like, just put a manifold on it at $1,600 or whatever the heck they cost these days, because I don't know that that is your problem, but you have something pointing to a problem that could disrupt airflow. It could disrupt low RPM drivability, and it's telling you, hey, it's like, hey, I'm a problem. Fix me, right? So you really want to start diagnosis there before you get way into the weeds on any other problem. Start there and see what's really going on with that intake manifold. Maybe 3,000 RPM is when that manifold flaps start to change. So maybe you just have too little airflow at that low RPM, but that's really where I would start. So when you clear the fault though, why is it okay for a little while and then it starts to act stupid? So your ECM is learning, it's adapting. It's probably getting to an adaptation point with those runners that it can't compensate for anymore. So early on, when you wipe the fault, you're not just clearing the fault, you're clearing all of the learned values of the ECM. So you're clearing all long-term fuel trim, all the throttle body adaptation stuff long-term, you're wiping out all of that. And then it's starting back from its base point. So it's probably gonna do okay for a little while. Now it's seeing problem. It's making corrections, it's making adjustments so you can drive the car with little to no notice of a problem. And then eventually it gets to the point where it can't compensate anymore. Bam, goes your check engine light. Now you have a fault stored. Kind of weird that it's an intake flap fault and not like a fuel trim fault, system too rich, system too lean. If you have VAGCOM, you want to go into measured value block 32 and look at what your fuel trim is when it starts doing it. Not while it's doing it necessarily, but after it has started doing it, so you can see maybe it's trying to add more fuel to compensate for a weak pump. Maybe it's pulling fuel back because the airflow is all squirrely inside of the intake manifold. So you have to look at this. You have a fault and start there. Obviously, make sure your maintenance is up to date. You know, that's huge. It's important. And clogged air filter could do something weird like this. It would probably do it all the time, not in relation to the code, but perhaps the compensation for the code is causing that. Look at your airflow meter readings, which I want to say is low measured value blocks 2 or 3, maybe 4. The good thing on the Touareg V8 is you have 2 airflow meters, so you can compare left side to right side, which is a really good strategy. If you have one dying, it may show a much higher, much lower reading than the other side. So that's what I would focus on, dude. But man, you got faults for the manifold. Start there. It is a problem. You know it is problematic on this and on the Audi side with the same engine. Start there with your thorough diagnosis and then move outward. And I'm sure you're going to stumble across a problem. I'm sure it's probably going to be related to that manifold. Not 100%, but boy, I'd like to get that handled first and then go way, way, way deep into your problem. One other thing you can do is you can hook up a fuel pressure gauge, a mechanical gauge, and watch it while it does it and see maybe you're losing fuel pressure from the delivery pump, and that could be your problem too. All right, last one of the day actually came in as a blog comment, but this is a question I get a lot, so I decided to answer it both on the blog at humblemechanic.com on an old post, and in video for you guys and for Whitney. So this one does come from Whitney. Charles, I know this is an old thread, and I'm really hoping you're still active. I'm still active, of course. I did what everyone else seems to have done. I filled up an empty 06 Jetta TDI with gasoline, drove 1/8 of a mile before the car turned off, had it towed, and I'm horrified thinking about the potential damage. What can you offer me about this VW assistance program? Info on how to research this. So, Whitney, you have an 06 Jetta. That's a good thing. The cars that were problematic, and the one that this post was about, is actually 09 and up. The Dieselgate cars, right? When it comes to your car, your Pompadour, you're in luck. It's really not that big of a deal. You are still going to have to do some work, but it's not nearly as problematic as it was on the 09 and up, and it's going to be really, really affordable from a parts and labor standpoint. You may have to pay a bunch of money to get all that gasoline out of there, or maybe environmental fees because it's probably mixed with a bit of diesel fuel. Personally, if I had a less new car, I'd probably just run it even with a tiny bit of diesel fuel. It'll be fine. It might run a little squirrely at times, but may even clean it out and do better. So here's the steps that you need to follow in order to get this taken care of. First, we need to get all the gasoline out of the tank. There's a number of ways you can do this. If you have a way to power the fuel pump, you can do it that way. You just need to keep a really close eye on it and make sure you don't overheat it. Personally, I wouldn't want to run that much gasoline through that pump. I would just go ahead and take the fuel pump out and pump it out, or if you can fit a hose down the fuel filler neck, you can do it that way too. Make sure you're using the right stuff. A lot of electric pumps you don't want to use with gasoline. They could spark and cause catastrophic thermal events, I think is the proper term that I like to use for that issue. You can also tow it to a shop, and most shops are going to have the ability, whether it's a hand crank pump, an electric pump, a vacuum powered pump, to remove that gasoline from the tank. Next, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to flush the lines from the pump in the tank all the way to the fuel filter housing. So we need to get all that gas out of the lines, right? That's our next step. You can do that blowing air through it. I usually use brake clean and shop air to blow that all out. I usually also go from the front to the back, not the back to the front, just because it's a little easier from a cleanup standpoint. Which way you do it really doesn't matter. Next, we're going to have to drain the fuel filter housing, get all the gasoline out of there, clean it out really well, put a new fuel filter in it, and then don't install it, just leave it kind of there. Next, we need to flush the lines from the filter to the high pressure fuel pump. That is not a very long distance, but we need to get all that fuel out of there, both delivery and return. Now, when it comes to the high pressure fuel pump, it would be best if you removed it and drained any gasoline out of there or sucked any gasoline out of the injectors. But I have seen this done many, many times without doing that. As long as there's no gas in the tank, no gas in the fuel filter housing, no gas in the lines, I've seen this work just fine. Next, we need to get our fuel tank with some diesel fuel in it. A couple gallons is fine. we need to prime the system. So we need to get fuel through the pump, into the fuel filter housing, and then to the high pressure fuel pump. This can be done with the scan tool, and that's really the best way. If you don't have the scan tool, cranking it usually works. It just takes a long time, and it's a lot of wear, like on the starter, on the high pressure pump. You'll probably get an oil pressure light because the oil pressure is going to read squirrely because the engine's not quite at the RPM that it should be, so your oil pressure is going to be a bit low. Just don't hold the key for like a minute and a half. Do like 10 seconds, turn it off, let it sit for 10 seconds, do it that way. That way you're not burning anything up. But again, the best way, technically the right way, is to prime all that with the scan tool. You could even activate the pump in the tank and prime it that way. Also not a bad idea to fill the fuel filter housing with fresh, clean diesel right when you're putting diesel fuel in the tank. That way it's at least primed up to that point. It's probably gonna run like crap for a little while, and that's okay. There's gonna still be gasoline in the system. Even if you get like 99.999, there's still a little bit of gas in the system. You could try something like diesel purge when you do this. That may help a little bit as well. I don't think you need to, but you can if you want to. When it boils down to it, the great thing is I've never seen this cause any kind of damage to injectors, fuel pumps, fuel filter housing, high pressure pumps, engines, none of it. Never seen any kind of damage to it, and I've seen a handful of these, well, more than a handful, a lot of these, that someone has filled with gasoline. This is not the 09, this is not the common rail engine. This is the older pump deuce engine, so it's much, much more resilient, much better from a standpoint of wrong fuel, poor fuel, or gasoline doesn't do catastrophic damage to the car. So the one we're talking about in your post that you commented on, Whitney, is the newest generation that does do catastrophic damage, potentially. Low pump, injectors, delivery pump, high pressure pump, all that stuff usually gets tank. I've had to put tanks in before from that because of gasoline contamination. But luckily, now I'm sure someone's had this kind of catastrophic damage on a pump deuce before, but luckily for you, the odds are really, really low, and we've fixed a ton of them just by pumping it out, flushing it with fresh diesel, and giving it a good hard test drive to make sure everything was out. All right, guys, that's it. I'm gonna wrap it up there. Great questions as always. If you have a comment about today's video, down below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Always appreciate that. Don't forget to subscribe right here on YouTube and ding that bell, or over at the blog at humblemechanic.com. You can also follow me on all the normal social platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, if you want exclusive content, videos you can't get anywhere else, as well as discounts to places like Black Forest, like we talked about today, Sonic Tools Eastwood, Scanner Danner's Diagnostic Book, which I need to get my copy, as well as MT Knives Eastwood, and more. Crew members also get the VW Audi training manuals for the classes that I teach, free as downloads. There's a link down in the description where you can check that out, learn all about the crew membership, and join it up. Best money you'll spend, and it's built so that you get a return on your investment. If you use these discounts, you could probably make your money back in just the year of the subscription. If that's not your thing, check out the Patreon with the link down in the description as well. And you can also do your shopping with my Amazon link. It costs you no more on Amazon. You just click it, buy whatever you're gonna buy anyway, and then I get a little kickback from it. So every little bit helps support the show and lets me know you guys like what we're doing and helps literally keep the lights on, which is important. Otherwise the video would be a little dark. With that, guys, I'm out. Thanks so much for watching. I love you, and I'll see you next time.